Hello, this is chapter 4 of The Living Isle from KAIA's perspective. "KAIA, it's not him," Hetty said as she placed her hand on my shoulder. She was trying to soothe me, but it only aggravated me. "I can see that," I barked. Taking another look at the man on the mat, through the scratches and grime, I knew for sure. It was my father's assistant, Kappa. He sometimes went with Dad into the forest to carry samples and notebooks, but he never stayed away long. As far as I knew, he was the last person to be with my dad. By the looks of his chest, rising and falling in jagged breaths, he wasn't dead yet. He could give me answers. Dropping to my knees, I grabbed the man's shoulders and shook him. "Where is my dad? Is he hurt? Did the same thing happen to him?" Kappa didn't show any signs of awareness. His eyes stared out into the room at nothing as he squirmed and writhed in pain. Hetty tugged at my arms. I shook her off and shook him harder, pleading with him to tell me what was going on. "Get your hands off him," another woman's voice called from the doorway. Kappa's partner, Tahuri, shot into the room and shoved me away from the bed. She bent down beside Kappa, her full body bulging out of her knee-length shift dress. Everything about Tahuri felt cozy, despite the way she had spoken to me. At least this woman looked like a mum, unlike how my own mum had been, skin and bones. Tahuri stroked Kappa's head, sweeping matted hair from his brow. Kappa's daughter, Ray, stood in the doorway, too afraid to come closer. I couldn't imagine what it would have been like to have to bring Matai here if it really was our dad. "Your father is the reason my man is dying," Tahuri spat. If he hadn't forced Kappa to go out on his hopeless missions, he never would have been hurt. Her words stung, and I had no way to disprove them, but I wasn't going to let her blame my dad for this. I retaliated by saying, "Kappa made his own choices." "Get out," Tahuri sneered. I didn't move. Instead, I stepped closer to the mat. "Kappa could help find my dad." "Get out! Can't you see he is dying?" Tahuri stood and shoved me in the chest. I stumbled back, but caught myself before I fell. It wasn't like a Sundana to push someone. She was hurting deeply. Hetty shook her head at me, giving me the same pitying look as Manaya had outside the learning hut that afternoon. I stormed from the room, shame boiling out of me. Kappa's health was just another thing that I felt I had to take responsibility for, even though Tahuri was probably right. This was my dad's fault. "Where is my dad?" I cried, but it was already clear he wasn't here. "Your dad has not been brought to us, KAIA. The men that brought in Kappa said there was no trace of him. Kappa has been poisoned. It's best to let him go peacefully." "Poisoned?" I exclaimed. There were poisoned flowers and plants in the forest, but they were easy to avoid if you knew what you were looking for, and easy enough to cure if you had the right oils with you. Dad never would have let Kappa be hurt. It can't have been flowers that caused his illness. "Yes, KAIA, but don't think the worst. He might still be safe. Maybe he's found somewhere to hide." "Hide? From what?" My face burnt and the hallway felt like it was shrinking. Why did I feel like she wasn't telling me everything she knew? "My dad is still out there. Did they even look?" It was no secret that the Sundana men didn't like that my dad left the village when they worked hard to provide us with food. "They are still out there trying, KAIA. Trust them to help." How could I trust the men to find him when they probably didn't care if he came back? He was out there and maybe he was still alive. I had to do something. I took off running back down the hall without looking at any of the healers that watched me, bursting out onto the deck which glowed with the light of the setting sun. I ran down the path and turned right, heading in the opposite direction from our hut. I only stopped when I'd reached the northern edge of our village. The bushes were more dense, purposefully left to grow wild, creating a dark and shadowy tunnel of green. The air was fresher here, closer to the sea than the rest of the village. If I listened closely, I could just hear the whoosh of the waves on the east coast. The hut loomed out of the bush like a sleeping creature, left to sleep for 50 years and become tangled up with the forest. Vines hung over its roof and dripped down over the awning like rows of necklaces. I marched up the stairs and through the beaded curtain that hung over the forever open doorway. Wave after wave of sweat and tangy scents washed over me as soon as my feet were in the door. The rows of shelves that lined the walls looked fit to burst as always, full of vials and sacks of herbs, berries and petals, dried and fresh, seeds and grasses. Many had been pulsed by hand into puree, others dried to be mixed into oils and ointments. Walking past each shelf, it was like walking past a different memory. The sweet scent of the flowers that grew around the ponds that were good for healing and soothing, the oil extracted from flaxes that filled every space of the village and made for good hiding or resting spots, and the dried berries that were turned into teas and drinks to cool even the hottest days. I wasn't looking for any of those now, though. In the deepest corner of the room, under a tiny desk, were the most potent ingredients, already mixed into their final form. The vials clunked together as I dug around in the shelf. Each different type of elixir was marked with a different symbol, 2 dots, a cross, and a dot. Since my dad had taught me how to read each one, I could recognize them with a quick glance as I flicked through them. The one I wanted was a dash and 2 dots. Turo juice. But it wasn't here. "What are you in need of?" Tenuku's scratchy voice came from behind me. His ropey grey plait swung by my head as he leaned down beside me to inspect the shelf. "Turo," I muttered. "I see." Frustrated that I couldn't find it, I spun around and looked up at his long, droopy face. "Where is it?" I demanded. His deep brown eyes studied me, and he stood up. He'd once been tall, and now his hunched back showed the signs of spending a lifetime bent over a bench stirring pots of oils. "My friend visited from Rindal today," he said, his voice rough like tree bark. "The man that bakes for the royals. You remember him?" I could tell he was trying to change the subject, but I nodded. I remembered the man and what he'd brought last time he came with his cart on the loop road from the west side of the isle. Round white buns with sweet raspberry frosting, crumbly pastries filled with soft fruit. We had our own treats here, but kava cakes were nothing compared to the sugary flavours from the Rindal bakery. "Would you like to join me in the back for some tea and treats?" "I can't. I have to go. Haven't you heard what's happened?" Even as I said it, I knew my words were wasted. Tenuku knew everything. He would know why I was here and why I wanted turo juice. Whenever someone came by his hut to buy oils, they brought him news from the village as well as leaves and berries for him to use. He was able to keep up to date without even stepping outside, and he never made them pay anything for their mixtures. He smiled at me. Even more reason to take a moment of pause. I was tempted, but I didn't have time. "I only came for toro juice." Tenuku pressed his spindly fingers together and smiled. "I need to make a fresh batch. Would you like to have some tea and buns while we wait?" The temptation got the better of me. Just until the turo is ready." I also couldn't do what I was planning to do without having a supply of the poison retractor. I had to blink as my eyes adjusted to the candlelit room through another beaded curtain at the back of the hut. A mixture of floral, fresh, and berry-sweet aromas floated towards me from a pot brewing on one of his stoves that stood on the opposite wall. It bubbled and popped as the flames burnt below. Steam swirled in the candlelight that bounced off the walls and vials. The room was cramped and busy, but just like looking down at the fish in the ponds, everything had its place. I sank into the chair at the round table in the centre of the room, and Tenuku placed a large mug of steaming sweet tea in front of me. It had the unmistakable tangy scent of acai berries, mixed with cinnamon. It might have seemed like a weird combination to someone that hadn't tried it. To me, it was comfort and warmth. I wrapped my hands around the cup, heat spreading through my fingers and palms. Taking a sip, the liquid warmed my body and I let out a long breath as I stared down at the red mixture. Tenuku walked over to one of the pots on his fire. He moved it over to a bench and poured it into some empty vials. The tea wasn't the only thing he'd been brewing. The mixture he'd poured was a swampy green. It looked like hana oil to me, made with leaves that squeezed out a dark green gel to soothe cuts and burns. It didn't have much of a smell. and the berries in my cup were stronger since they were close to my nose. He placed stoppers on the vials and joined me at the table with his own cup of tea. There was a paper bag in the middle of the table and he pushed it towards me. Inside were several frosted rolls, as fresh as I could imagine. Pulling one out carefully so that none of the frosting could fall off, I took a bite. The dough dissolved in my mouth and the berries popped against my teeth. It had been a long time since I'd had one of these, and every time was like the first. With each bite of roll and sip of tea, the pit of worry in my stomach shrunk. But I couldn't forget the reason I'd come here tonight. Kappa might die, I said into my teacup. Yes, he might. There will be prayers outside the healing hut tonight. I will keep him in my thoughts from here. Tunuku sighed. I sent what I had left of my churu juice to the healers, but I didn't have much after today. You see, KAIA, I had another visitor from Rindal today, and this one was not bringing sweet treats. I looked up at Tunuku. He wanted turo? His silence made me think there was far more happening than I realised. What's going on? I asked, placing my empty teacup on the table as gently as I could manage. My hands were shaking. Tunuku stacked his hands on the table, the veins on the back like vines wrapping over his skin, and cleared his throat. The mayor of Rindal sent the men to buy every last drop of turo juice I had. He'll be back for more in 2 days' time. It wasn't unheard of for people from Rindal to take a liking to Tunuku's oils, but Rindal was a fenced village by the coast. The forest my people lived in was just a pretty green backdrop for them, from what I'd heard about their cosy little village. What did their mayor know that we didn't? I need turo too, I said bluntly, shielding the worry that was creeping back in. You must be thinking of your dad, Tunuku said softly. I didn't respond. The man told me that no one should enter the forest, and anyone already in there should get out as fast as they can. My dad is in danger. I'd already known it after seeing Kappa, but if someone that worked for the mayor of Rindal had bothered to tell a Sundana not to go in the forest, it must be serious. Your dad is one of the most skilled herbalists in the village, with a vast knowledge of the forest and everything in it, he continued, smiling sadly at me. If anyone can make it out alive, it will be him. You don't know that, I snapped. You're right, I don't. There are many things I don't know, and maybe never will. He nodded thoughtfully. But I do know that risking any more lives for another is not a wise decision. I could feel my worry growing stronger and tried to push it down, turning it into anger. Why can't the royals send out a search party, I asked, but even as I said it, I knew they never would. They'd be glad to see one of us gone from their isle, even though they were the ones that had brought my people here. The royals don't concern themselves with matters on the ground, Tunuku tried to hide the bitterness in his voice. Not a lot made him upset, but any mention of the royals brought up memories of a past we all wanted to forget, especially him. To the royals in Highwick Castle at the top of the northern cliffs, we were only ants, running around and working for them. As long as we stayed out of their way and did what we were told, they'd leave us alone. They'd only notice a problem if they ran out of food. Do you think it's happening again? I asked with a shiver. We both knew what I was talking about. Everyone called it the festering, even the Rindal people. The name of the event was the only thing that other residents of Derna agreed with us on. 50 years ago, something poisoned the crops that fed the entire village. Many Sundanas died, nearly everyone according to what Tunuku had told me. That included my grandparents and many of their friends. Tunuku sometimes called it a miracle that anyone had survived, but sometimes he called it a great sadness. The Sundanas left behind had to rebuild their village from the few people that remained. But many people from Rindal died too. They didn't understand what had happened, so they blamed my people, the newly arrived refugees from a land destroyed by drought. They believed the Sundanas, who had worked their fields, had poisoned the food as a way to get back at the royals who brought them here, from our true home on the third isle, Hapai, into a life that was not what they had been promised. It was the reason that there were still laws that kept us out of their village. No one knew the true cause of the festering, but everyone lost someone that week. Tinuku's eyes widened, and for a moment I imagined a younger, frightened version of himself hiding under his wrinkled face, facing the death of most of his village. His eyes went glassy like they did when he was thinking back to the past. "This is not like the festering," he said staunchly, simply to get the words out. "This is something quite different from what I had heard." "What have you heard?" "KAIA, I need to know if it's still safe for Martai here." "I wish I could tell you, but it is still too early to say. For now, we have to let the men of our village protect us all. If there is any threat to our village, they will be the first to know. A handful of them have stopped work to patrol the edge of the forest." "And what about Dad? He's out there, and whatever poisoned Kappa could have poisoned him too." Tinuku didn't reply. Instead, he drained his teacup and took both of our cups to fill up again. When he returned to the table, his eyes were brimming with tears. He took my hand and gripped it in his. "When your grandparents were dying during that horrible week all those years ago, I promised them one thing. I would protect this village in any way that I could, and make sure that we never had to go through something like that again. I learned how to help the ill and injured with the plants around us, no matter what was causing their suffering." He blew out a long breath over his tea, sending a cloud of steam into the air. "Now that I am old, I am proud to say that I have spent my years making sure that the younger people have the knowledge to continue on with after I'm gone. All I have left to give now are my words, and they are not given in vain." He held my hand tighter, tears running down his skin like rain down a tree trunk. "KAIA, letting you walk out there wouldn't just hurt me, but it would break a promise I made to our dead, our ancestors. They can only protect you so much now." I didn't know how to comfort him. I didn't want to comfort him. I wanted him to give me the poison retractor so that I could go and find my dad. "The loyalty of a Sundana is the life of the tribe," I said, repeating something he had told me himself many times. "You are loyal, but so am I. You said it yourself. Wouldn't you help anyone that needed help?" "Not at the loss of another life. Not if it meant you were in danger, KAIA." I let go of his hand and stood from the table. "I will not let him die. I'm going to bring him home. There will always be a place for him here. He knows that, KAIA. This is your home, the current place of our people, and this is where you need to be, with your village and with Martai." He didn't understand. His whole family had died 50 years ago. He had no children or grandchildren. Tinuku hadn't had the chance to save anyone he loved, but I did. Even if my dad wasn't the best to Martai and me, I still had the chance to get him back. "You won't stop me from doing this," I said as I stood up from the table. Tinuku pulled himself up, and for a moment I wondered if he might try to stop me, but he could barely walk. He wouldn't be able to chase me. Instead, he sighed and walked over to a cabinet beside the stoves. He pulled out a box and took out a vial with a dash and 2 dots drawn on the side. "Turo juice." He held it out to me sadly. "This is the last I have until the next batch is ready. If you really feel that you must go, please take it with you." I nodded and took the vial, clutching it in my hands as I walked out of the room. "Trust your village, KAIA," Tinuku called after me as I left the hut. Was I really about to do this? Could I walk into the forest that had poisoned a man and may have done the same to another? There was no way I could ask the men to go further into the forest to look for him. If I wanted to know his fate, I'd have to go and find him myself. But if I left, Martai would be here without me. Who would look after him then? I was the one that knew him best and understood what he was going through. If I left him behind, was I just as bad as Dad? I shook my head as the idea struck me. No, I could never be like Dad. I would come home to Martai. Even if I found out that Dad was already dead, at least I'd tried. I wasn't going to let him grow up without a father. A child should not have to grow up without parents. All I could hope was that one day Martai would understand why I'd left, and he would thank me. Night bugs buzzed from the trees, and I weaved the corners and took each bridge crossing over the winding river until I reached the row of huts where our hut was. Uta was standing outside on the deck of my hut, illuminated by the glow of a single lamp. "Where were you?" he said in a frantic whisper when I reached the top of the stairs. "Is Martai asleep?" I asked. "Yes, he's been asleep for about an hour." "Where were you, KAIA?" "Getting supplies." "Supplies?" I'm going to find my dad. I watched the realization of what I meant sink into Utta's face. He wasn't the man they brought in from the rainforest. It was Kappa. He's been poisoned, and Dad is still out there, I said. I tried to walk past him into the hut, but he stood in front of the door. KAIA, don't do this. You don't need to take on this burden. Utta gave me that pitying look, and I wanted to scream. Don't, I muttered, anger building in me. What if you get injured or killed? You'll leave Martai without his sister. Do you really want to risk that, to look for a man who left you both behind? He grimaced and shook his head. I could tell he hadn't meant to say that last part, but he wasn't saying anything I hadn't already thought. I leaned back against the deck's railing and huffed in frustration, looking up at our hut. It had the most unusual roof on the whole row, like a giant funnel. People had laughed and pointed when Dad hauled it up onto the roof, watching as he wound the tubes he'd crafted from bamboo around the edges. But Dad had found a way to collect the rainwater and keep our hut in constant supply, and they quickly became jealous. When it hadn't rained for a few days and everyone else had trekked down to the river to sieve water in the smouldering heat, we were able to stay in our hut with enough water to drink and bathe all day if we'd wanted to. He hadn't offered to share the plans with anyone though, and the people didn't like it. Sundanas shared everything. Utta leaned against the railing and looked up too. We were silent for a while, deep in thought. Aleki, your dad, is my dear friend. You know that, he said eventually. We were destined to be friends before we were born. But Aleki has made some choices I don't agree with, one of those being his research in the forest. Each time he goes in there, he chooses his work over the both of you, over our village. I don't say that to hurt you, I say that because you know it's true. I nodded. I did know it. I thought of all the work every man did for our village, feeding us and the rest of the isle, and the women that cared for the children and made clothes and meals. They all did things to help. What did he ever do for us? But if I could bring him back, things might be different. If his life was in danger this time, maybe he would decide that he couldn't continue in the forest. There would be things for him to do here, even if he still wouldn't work with the crops. He could help repair huts or fishing nets. Martai would have his dad. It was worth it for that chance. I sucked in a breath and forced myself to ask the question, will you take him? Will you look after Martai while I'm gone? Atai's mouth curved downwards. KAIA, my family is there for you and your brother. The whole village is. I wish you'd see that and stay. Is that a yes? Atai turned to me. Do you really feel that you have to do this? Yes. Ata nodded. Then Marama will look after Martai. You can be sure of that, and I will come with you. If you're going into the forest to look for Aleki, I will make sure you come back alive. I glared at Ata and shook my head. I don't need protecting. I'm choosing to do this for you, KAIA, for the friend your father was to me. If you go, so do I. No, you're not coming with me, I insisted and stormed inside, shutting the door on Ata. He was treating me like a child, but I didn't need him. His family needed him here. It wasn't worth risking the life of another dad for him to follow me in there. I would do this alone, like I always did things. I swept back the curtain around my mat and knelt down on the floor. It was already way past sunset, but I hadn't had time to say my daily farewell to the sun. We were supposed to do it every day, but some days I was far too busy to remember to do it. Other days, like today, I just had to make time because my head was spinning and I needed something to ground me. I bowed my head and in my head spoke to her, the sun. I didn't know today would end like this, but I know that you are watching over me and you have a plan for me. Please guide me tomorrow. I crawled onto my mat and willed myself to fall asleep. I needed to make sure I woke up before the sun rose so I wouldn't have to say goodbye to Martai. It was already going to be hard enough without having to explain. That's the end of chapter 4. Stay tuned for the next video in 2 days' time. Thanks for watching.